This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 31st of May 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from the Hay Festival of Arts and Literature in Hay-on-Wye, Wales. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, a literary focus show today from the centre of the largest, most diverse and best established festival of ideas in the world. Author, human rights lawyer and trustee of the festival, Philippe joins me to look at the world through this lens. And we'll also hear from the writer and academic Fara, Dabhoiwala, and the winner of the new Climate Fiction Prize, Daré. First though, here's the news. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warned today that the threat from China is real and potentially imminent as he pushed allies in the Indo-Pacific to spend more on their own defence needs. Hegseth, speaking for the first time at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Asia's premier forum for defence leaders, militaries and diplomats, underlined that the Indo-Pacific region was a priority for the Trump administration. Ukraine resisted US and Russian pressure to commit to attending another round of peace talks on Monday, saying it first needed to see Russian proposals, while a leading US senator warned Moscow it would be hit hard by new US sanctions. US President Donald Trump has urged Moscow and Kyiv to work together on a deal to end their 3-year-old war, and Russia has proposed a second round of face-to-face talks with Ukrainian officials next week in Istanbul. And David Seymour, leader of the Libertarian ACT New Zealand Party, was sworn in as Deputy Prime Minister today, taking the role from Winston Peters, in a deal struck when the three-party coalition government was formed in 2023. His party was behind last year's controversial move to enshrine a narrower interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi that says it discriminates against non-Indigenous citizens, though the bill failed in Parliament. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome. I'm Georgina Godwin. I'm in the buzzing green room in the middle of Hay Festival. With me is Philippe Sands, KC, author, Professor of Law at University College London, a practising barrister at Matrix Chambers, a very busy person and Vice President of Hay Festival. Philippe, welcome.
Lovely to be with you again, Georgina.
And it's again and again and again because although we're speaking today from Hay, you and I have had quite the festival journey around the world together this year.
It's sort of a bit embarrassing, isn't it? Have you been following me or have I been following you? We've got on a trail that I think started in India and then detoured to Sri Lanka, and since then we've been in
Auckland,
New Zealand, Auckland,
and Sydney,
Australia,
and here we are in Hay.
And now in Hay.
Yeah.
And we've been racking up the miles and the emissions of CO2, much to my kids' horror.
Well,
and I get a lot of grief for it.
I can completely understand that, and I have a tiny bit of a solution. It's the European Festivals Forest Programme. It's a carbon sequestration, I can never say that word properly, project. But what it does is that music, theatre and arts festivals across Europe work together to plant a new festivals forest in Iceland. And so for every flight I take, I donate 20 trees.
I'd like the details of that, please, because I will assuage my guilt and make a serious contribution.
Yeah. Well, but it's been so fascinating being at these various festivals, and it is a kind of circuit. People with a new book out this year do tend to sort of follow each other across these festivals. But now we end up here in Hay, and Hay is it's completely its own beast.
It is. I mean, the interest for an author is. My wife Natalia often asks me, why do I want to do multiple events on the same book or on the same subject? And I think the answer to that is that, as you've probably picked up, every place is different. People in India are interested in different things from people in Auckland, are interested in different things from people in Hay. And so you can take the same book with the same subject matter, with the same ideas, with the same stories, and the focus in each place takes you into a new area. And I find that fascinating, and I learn a lot because you also meet people who come up to you afterwards and say, what about this and what about that? It is an amazing experience. It's
Yeah.
a real privilege, actually.
Well, you know what? I was meant to come to our next guest a lot later on in the programme, but I'd really like to bring him into the conversation now, because this is what Hey is all about, is fostering these different conversations, both on and off stage. So he is Fara Dabhoiwala. I got that wrong, I'm sorry, you're going to correct me in a moment. He's an historian at Princeton University, currently on sabbatical. He specialises in social, cultural and intellectual history, and just a brilliant man. His book, What is Free Speech? The History of a Dangerous Idea, is out now, and he's talking about that and free speech and conversation generally. Farah, many thanks for coming on the show and to be here with Philippe. I know you guys have already struck up a conversation about various shared interests.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, Georgina. Thank you. And I think just to echo what Philippe said about going around the world, talking to people about the same words, the same book, provokes tremendously different responses. And that's a really wonderful pleasure and an instruction for an author to realise that what you think and how you put it out there can be received in so many different ways.
I think also one of the things that for me is really interesting in the writing experience, asking the question, who are you actually writing for? And for this book, which is so heavily related to developments in Chile and in Spain.
This is 38 Londres Street. 38
Londres Street, about Augusto Pinochet and a Nazi called Walter Rauff. I have consciously reached out to audiences that are not just British audiences. And part of the significance of going to different places is you do pick up different reactions to the same stories from different parts of the world. And I think as a writer, hoping to connect with an audience that is global in the sense of being around the world, these trips are really important.
And I mean, my book is a global history of free speech. And one of the themes in that book is that free speech is not one thing. It means completely different things all around the world. Where does that come from? But a more fundamental point that I try to make is that free speech, like all speech, never depends just on the words or even just on the intentions of the speaker. It's always about the context. It's always about what the audience brings to it. And so being with actual audiences live in different places, bringing very different things, is exactly epitomizing some of the things I hope people will take away from reading the book itself. I
mean, free speech, obviously, hugely, always a hot topic, but particularly at the moment. And Philippe, with your human rights lawyer hat on, this is somewhere where you both come together. And speaking in these different parts of the world, each country has its own sensitivities. And I know at some festivals they ask you, please not to mention this country or this particular thing that's going on within their own domestic politics. And of course, we're seeing what's happening in the United States right now. Both of you teach at US universities. It's a very difficult time for everybody. So how can free speech not be one thing? If you're at a festival and they're opening up and saying, talk about anything except this, how do you navigate that?
Well, I mean, free speech, I wrote the book because I wanted to find out where this wonderful ideal that we all believe in modern Western democracies came from, and why we can nonetheless never agree on exactly what it means within our cultures and across our cultures. And I'm afraid the answer is that it's always, first of all, it's quite a recent invention. It's invented in the 18th century. In its modern sense, and secondly, it's always been weaponized. It's always from the get-go been a slogan that people use. As the subtitle of the book is, a dangerous idea. It's dangerous in the sense that we love, which is it can unsettle orthodoxies and give voice to the powerless and help change the world for the better. But it's also dangerous because it's always been weaponized by the powerful to silence those they don't want to hear. And so the way that that's played out is deeply entrenched in the cultures of every place where it has evolved, and those are fascinating stories, but you end up in very different places in the here and now. That's one of the difficulties with thinking of it as a universal.
Philippe, how does one fight back against this? How does one protect free speech?
Well, I mean, coming to your previous question, I think these are very personal issues. I mean, my basic principle is that if I'm going to go to a place, I'm going to say what I think. And if someone says to me, you can't mention this issue, or you can't mention that issue, I'm either not going to go, or I'm going to find a way to talk about it, which is respectful, which is courteous, which is perhaps a little bit coded, but I'm not going to not talk about it. But now I'm encountering, for the first time in relation to a country that is a very big part of my life, the United States. I'm married to an American, my 3 kids are all American, and I find myself in a situation. Fara and I were just talking about this new, directives that are being adopted in the United States, which basically say the US administration will now scan social media and other sources to see whether X or Y person has been engaged in speech that is anti-Semitic or anti-this or anti-that. And that has an incredible chilling effect. And the question that I'm now asking myself is, what do I do? Do I stick to my principles and say what I think? Or do I curtail what I say or how I say it because of a fear that I'm not going to be allowed to get into X or Y country? To be very frank, it was one thing with Russia or China, which I don't go to regularly. But for the first time, we have a situation in which the United States, a country I normally travel to 4 or 5 times a year, is basically saying, if you say things that we consider to be inappropriate, you will not be entering our country. What do I do as a writer, as a lawyer, as a university professor? It has a chilling effect on free speech. And it's ironic that those who are promoting these restrictions do so in the name of free speech.
It's only a superficial irony as I go into in my book, because this is exactly how the phrase has always been weaponized. And of course, it's not just the headline that they're putting out as the administration is they're going after anti-Semitic speech because they want to make clear that this is unacceptable in any kind of civilized discourse. But really what they mean is any speech that doesn't align with the administration itself. And they've made that perfectly clear in revoking visas for people who they believe shouldn't be speaking out against the Trump administration's own policies. So it's terrible. It's a blatant attack on free speech as we would like to see it upheld. I happen to be an American citizen myself. I think the only thing that we can take heart from is that American citizens up until now have greater rights than non-citizens, and they should use their voices to speak out. That's one of the ways in which free speech has always worked. Those with the voice try to give voice to the powerless in order to amplify the messages that they themselves can't bring to the table.
And coming to your question, I mean, of course, one way in which to deal with this is by legislation. And that is, of course, a necessary thing. And ultimately, these are decisions that will be taken by judges in courts of various jurisdictions as to whether X or Y crosses a line into impermissibility or is permissible. But ultimately, I think it's a very personal thing. It's a thing I've thought about a lot in relation to an earlier book that I wrote, East-West Street, which is the first in a trilogy which culminates with 38 Londres Street. But in the course of writing East-West Street, I came to know a man called Nicholas Frank, who's the son of Hans Frank, who was Adolf Hitler's lawyer from 1928 to 1933 and then Governor General of Nazi-occupied Poland. And I've often talked with Nick, who himself was a very distinguished journalist at Stern, how could his father have crossed these lines into criminality? His father, hugely cultured, hugely intelligent, and Nicholas would say it's a lack of civil courage. It's a failure on an individual basis of being willing to cross lines. And I think for me, we are at that moment now, and each of us has to determine what are the lines we will not cross. And I think my ability to express concern about things that are happening in X or Y jurisdiction must be undiminished. I have to stick to my principles.
And these are conversations that you both are having on stage as well as off. Fara, tell me what you're actually doing here at Hay and who you're going to be talking to and what about.
Well, I had a wonderful panel yesterday with the leaders of Pen Wales, the organisation supporting writers, not just in Wales but around the world. They do a lot of wonderful work helping writers in other parts of the world who are imprisoned or persecuted for their views and bringing their cases to the attention of the public. And the inspirational leader of Pen International was there, who's himself a Kurdish writer who started off actually as a human rights lawyer, as you may know, Philippe.
Burhan Sonmez.
Sonmez. And he was the victim of horrific near assassination many years ago. He fled Turkey, came to London and became a writer, to cut a long story short, and he now leads Pen International very effectively, and a wonderful Welsh poet. The three of us were talking about what freedom of expression means in the world today and what the particular important role is of writers and poets, writers of fiction and poetry, why they seem always to be persecuted by authoritarian governments, and why we need to help stop that and bring attention to their plight. It's very
Absolutely, and Philippe's done sterling work. He was a former president of English Pen, and indeed I'm a trustee of English Pen, so we're both completely on board with what you're talking about, but it's very difficult to ensure that freedom, isn't it?
I just want to reinforce what Fara has just said. So in my book 38 Londres Street, where I deal with aspects of the Pinochet regime, one of the very striking aspects of life in Chile from 1973 until Pinochet left office in 1990, and then subsequently, because he remained head of the army, and there was a chilling effect. There were no criminal cases looking at the crimes of the Pinochet regime. There was complete immunity for the top dogs, and there was total impunity in relation to torture, disappearance, killing. But into that legal void stepped writers. And one of the works that I use a lot in 38 Londres Street is a remarkable book by the writer Roberto Bolaño called Nights in Chile, which was published in 1997, still a time of impunity in Chile, in which through a supposed work of fiction, a novel, he tells a story that evokes issues of criminality. And in particular in that book, of great interest to me, is that he identifies a relationship between Augusto Pinochet, the general, the dictator of Chile, and an old Nazi who's living in Chile called Walter Rauff. And he suggests the two have a relationship. And of course, that's one of the big themes of 38 Londres Street, is it's an exploration of whether in fact they had a relationship. And Bolaño was not alone. Remarkably, in 1965, the poet Pablo Neruda predicted what would happen after September the 11th, 1973, the coup d'etat. And I think the point that Fara makes is the place of literature, of writers, of poets, of songmakers in these times is absolutely crucial, because they can go into a space that others may not be able to go into.
And the authorities find us terrifying.
It's about control, isn't it? I mean, authoritarian governments always want to control the thoughts of the people, and the fiction and poetry are the most uncontrollable, ungraspable, powerful, therefore, medium.
Well, Pablo Neruda died a few days after the coup d'etat in September 1973, and there is a criminal investigation that is underway right now, and one of the judges I've been dealing with in relation to my book is leading that investigation and has found that there is culpable evidence that Pablo Neruda was in fact murdered. And that, I think, is emblematic of exactly what we're talking about.
Now, you have an event, in fact, very shortly we're going to have to let you go quite soon, because you're on stage with Anushka Ashtana and Jeremy Bowen and Lise Doucette.
Indeed. Talking about the news, I mean, what can we say about the news today? I hope there'll be some uplifting discussion as well as depression all round. But, I mean, this question of freedom of expression is so vitally important to us as writers, but also to politics today. And one thing I'm trying to bring out in my book is that we need to have a more capacious sense of understanding what free speech really is. It's not just a flat one-size-fits-all model. It's not even within our societies always the same thing. There are different kinds of free speech. There's a free speech of creative artists, of comedians, of painters, which is completely different from, say, the free speech that we think is important to uphold flourishing democracy. You know, writers, creative people have immense leeway with the truth, with the literal truth, with facts. That's not their concern. Their concern is to challenge people to think differently on an artistic level. In political discourse, on the other hand, truth is actually very important. If we just allow lies to flourish and misinformation to be on the same par with fact, then we're going to have a very debased political discourse. And so we always need to think, what is free speech for? What is it being invoked for in this particular case? How is it being used? And then we can decide, well, is that really worthy of the noble mantle freedom of expression, or is it actually an abuse of liberty to do what you're doing with your words?
And you're later on today, you're with Lydia Palgren and also Pankaj Mishra. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's a very interesting panel because one of the issues about freedom of expression that we also lose sight of is it's not just about individuals on the one hand and governments on the other hand. It's about the media. It's especially about the mass media and how they are able to amplify certain voices, diminish others, shape public opinion, if you like. And that panel is about how our Western media do a not great job at portraying what's happening in the vast majority of the planet, and how voices from the global South, as it's sometimes put, need better forums in the West, so we can understand with greater empathy, with greater understanding, what is happening outside of the borders of our own cultures.
Philippe, what are you on stage talking about today and tomorrow?
I've got 2 events today and 3 tomorrow. I'm starting off my day interviewing my neighbour in London, Nick Harkaway, who happens to be the son of my other late neighbour, David Cornwall, aka John le Carré. And he's written a book called Carla's Choice, which brings back Smiley. George Smiley, the eponymous British spy, the counterweight to James Bond. And it's a book that I think many, many people were very sceptical about, but remarkably, Nick has absolutely pulled it off. And I think everyone recognises he's done it. He's situated a book between The Perfect Spy Who Came In From the Cold and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and reinstated a new life of George Smiley and Carla, his nemesis, in Moscow. So that's the morning, and then the afternoon
Interestingly enough, Nick Harkaway was, I think, the very first person I ever interviewed at Hay Festival.
Oh.
So it's just
very
amazing.
small world and an amazing
15 years ago.
Amazing coincidence.
Yeah.
And then in the afternoon, I'm being interviewed by the wonderful writer Juan Gabriel Vasquez, Colombian, who someone I've come to know very well, on my book 38 Londres Street, which basically tells a double tale. It's the third in the trilogy that started with East West Street, and it asks first what were the real circumstances of General Augusto Pinochet's return from London to Santiago in March 2000, rather than being sent for trial to Madrid. What really happened? Was there a deal between the British and the Chileans? And the second thing that I look at are all of the rumours that Pinochet had a close mate called Walter Rauff, who was an old Nazi. He was famous for having operated the mobile gas vans used in 1941 and 1942 to gas to death hundreds of thousands of people, Jews, Poles, Roma, and others. Was there a connection between the two men? So it's a sort of a double journey, a double investigation.
Yeah. Now, Philippe, earlier you and I were talking about climate and how guilty we felt about the amount of air miles we've been racking up. Well, there is a new prize for climate. The inaugural Climate Fiction Prize announced its winner earlier. It's supported by Climate Spring. It celebrates outstanding fiction engaging with the climate crisis, and it aims to broaden the scope of climate storytelling. Well, it was won by Abi Daré for her novel And So I Roar, which explores the intersection of climate change and social justice in Nigeria. And I'm really pleased to say that Abi joins us now. Abi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Am I supposed to?
Yes, talking to the microphone. If people are just joining us, I must just explain. We're in the Green Room at Hay Festival in Hay-on-Wye in Wales, and I'm joined by 3 fantastic authors who are all appearing here at the festival. Abi, I wonder if you could just tell us about the Climate Fiction Prize.
So I'm very, very honoured to be the inaugural Climate Fiction Prize winner. It's a prize set up to, as you said, to celebrate outstanding climate fiction, so novels that tackle the climate crisis across the world, but the novels that not just talk about sort of dystopian future, but here and now. And it's such an honor to be shortlisted, to have been shortlisted and to win, because the breadth of novels that were on the shortlist which just completely blew my mind. And I'm still kind of getting used to the idea that I've won this, so it's great.
How does it intersect with social justice in Nigeria?
So my novel, essentially, I went in, and it's interesting because I didn't go in writing a climate fiction. I went in writing about a girl seeking education, and it very quickly occurred to me that I could not escape from the crisis happening within the region. So the book is set in rural Nigeria. There's a 14-year-old girl who wants an education and realizes that the environment where she's come from, her home, has been devastated by the climate, by the current crisis with the climate. And so that book sort of intersects with the injustices that she and her friends, a group of girls, suffer, but as not directly as a result of the issues with the climate, but also about the people that surround them. So I tried to show the intersectionality, but also how intricately linked all of these things are with the climate.
Now, climate is very, very important to Hay. There's a whole sort of environmental strand, isn't there, Philippe?
There is, and I'm very happy to be doing an event tomorrow with 3 other writers on the rights of nature and justice in the natural world. Climate is, of course, a big part of that. I think I've been invited because I co-chaired an international working group with a distinguished Senegalese jurist on the definition of a new crime, the 5th international crime of ecocide, which would essentially, for the first time, move away from an anthropocentric approach to the criminalization of certain activities. We have existing international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, the crime of aggression. They're all focused for very decent reasons on the protection of the human. And there's a gap. And that gap is the natural world, the environment. I was very influenced as a young lawyer by an article I read in the late 1980s, Should Trees Have Standing, by a great American jurist, Christopher Stone. And that theme actually has been taken up in a book very recently published, a wonderful book that I think people should read. And I think it's probably best read alongside your novel, which I'm sorry to say I haven't yet read, but I am going to read. And that's the new book by Robert Macfarlane, Is a River Alive?, which I think evokes the question of whether natural objects, a river, the atmosphere, the environment, the climate system, lands, mountains, should have legal rights.
And Fara, how far does your work intersect with climate change and the environment?
It doesn't really address that as an issue. Of course, it is a prime area of free speech controversy in the present. So the general arguments of the book absolutely pertain to that. If you look at the United States right now, what the administration is doing is shutting down not just anti-Semitic speech, as it would label it, but any speech about the climate crisis. Indeed, cutting funding for work on the climate crisis, but not allowing people really in the federal government even to talk about it, because they want to wish the problem away by pretending it doesn't exist. It's a classic example of censorship of the most egregious kind, masquerading as freedom of expression in the terms that the administration is trying to put forward.
And Abby, in Nigeria, how proactive is the government on these issues?
I think that I haven't seen what I want to see. I've realized that with the way that sort of infrastructure is invested in, rural areas are often ignored. Right, and this is where based on my research, I've seen most of the devastation. It's quite more glaring than anywhere else. I haven't. I know that there are bodies that have been set up to address these things, but it's not as active as I should say that I've seen. Right, I had to go seeking for the information and seeking for ideas, because obviously I'm writing a novel. I'm thinking, how do I provide a solution for this book? And I had to go seeking for that information, finding the education and that I need to help me sort of fuel my research and the novel. So I think to answer your question is that I think a lot more can be done and should be done, but not enough has been done. And again, I think it also depends on the state. So Lagos State has some investment and there's a bit of awareness about it, but I haven't seen the same across the other states.
And Abby, will you be speaking again here at the festival?
And I'm going home today.
You're going home today. But people can actually listen back, because there is
Yes,
this whole kind of streaming service
Yes.
and all the rest of it. So Abby's book is called And So I Roar. Philippe's latest book is 38 Londres Street. And Fara's is What is Free Speech? The History of a Dangerous Idea. Thank you all so much for being with me today. I know that you've all got incredibly busy days, and not just on stage. Of course, the off-stage conversations matter too. And that's what we're going to be hanging around here for the rest of the day. day recording and chatting to people. So we do hope that you can stay with us here on Monocle Radio. I'm Georgina Godwin, and that was Monocle on Saturday.